Well, good morning everybody and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all fighting fit and well. Look, today I want to talk to you about another type of photography that I absolutely love doing, and it's photography that I've been doing since I was 16, and that's a long time ago, around about 1979 I think it would have been, and that is street photography. Now, being a commercial photographer for some time, in between jobs, I usually find myself in capital cities throughout this country, and obviously COVID has stopped travel, but they're relaxing those laws now, so I'm able to travel again within Australia. And I usually find myself in major cities such as Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, of course, where I live, Adelaide, any state I've been to with my photography work, commercially that is. But when I go to these locations, I always bring my street camera with me and street lens. And I just love street photography. I got my first camera when I was 10 years of age in 1973. And that was a Yashica 35mm film camera. And I thought, what a wonderful piece of equipment this thing is. I was just running around taking photos willy-nilly of everything that I could see, that anything that moved was fair game. But it wasn't until about 6 years later, when I turned 16, that I'd saved up enough money to buy a new camera, and that was an Olympus OM40. It was the first Olympus camera, still 35mm film that had a program mode in it, but and I never used that. It was the Yashica way back when I was 10 years of age that taught me photography. But I went out and brought this Olympus 35mm film camera with a 35mm lens, just like the Yashica had. And the reason why I like that lens is because that's probably the best focal length for street photography, because you've got to get close to your subjects. Now, taking you back to the age of 16, I hopped on a train, and I was in Sydney, because that's where I live, and I caught a train to the centre of Sydney, and I wanted to photograph the town hall. Now, what I didn't realise was when I arrived there at lunchtime, all the people had come out of their offices and there was thousands and thousands of people. Quite frankly, it looked like a war zone. I couldn't believe it. It was probably one of the first times I'd ever been to the city by myself. So here I am walking around Sydney amongst thousands of people, just rushing around, pushing people over, bumping into people, because they only had probably half an hour for lunch. And I was looking at all this mayhem and I thought, geez, this might make some good photography. So that was my introduction to street photography, where I just deliberately walk into a crowd and go snap, 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 snap. And when I got home, because I'd turned my family bathroom, my mother and father's bathroom, into a dark room, and I developed some of these images. I couldn't believe what I had captured. There was no technical know-how involved in it either, and that's one of the things I like. What I like about street photography is that there's no perfection involved here. You're not worried about straight horizon lines or quality depth of field. The street is an untidy, dirty, rough place, let's face it. And I believe that street photography images should not turn a scene such as a street scene into something pretty, because quite frankly it's not really. Let's face the facts here. And even though this is my personal opinion, it's been successful for me for close to 30 years of shooting the street, or the streets of this country, and overseas, by the way. I was lucky to go to New York, where all my idols were taking street photos. But talking about idols, way back when I was 16, I went to the library, because there was no internet, there was no YouTube or Twitter or Instagram. There was nothing like that. We had books, things we read. And I went to the local library and I wanted to find out what street photography was all about. And I came across a book titled Into the Dark. And I thought, God, what's that? So what it was a book on street photography. Then there was other books depicting street photography from the late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and early 80s in New York. And that is where I really discovered what street photography was all about. So my idols were people like Bruce Geldon, Gary Winograd, Joel Merkowitz, Sol Leiter, and probably the greatest street photographer of all is Henri Cartier-Bresson. I mean, These people used very plain equipment, not like we've got these days, and their images are just priceless. People have tried to copy their work, forget it, you won't be able to do it because of how these people used to do it, how they used to read the street, and reading the street's very important if you want to be successful at this. So moving forward, I started to really pursue street photography, and when I first started at the age of 16, I was only a kid, and it was a bit daunting for me. Even though I'm a big man, I'm 6'4" now, and I stand out quite large, so to speak. But I quickly found out that I had to blend in with the scene. I had to blend in with the street. In other words, I had to read the street, and that's very, very important if you want to undertake street photography. So with the way I do it is I go out and I have one camera, a small mirrorless camera, which I'll show you in a moment, and one lens. That's all I take, and 2 batteries. That's all I take. I don't take big cameras or big lenses. I often see people in the street photographing streets with big digital SLRs and big zoom lenses. That's, once again, my personal opinion. I don't think that's how street photography should be. You have to get close. The old saying, if your images aren't good enough, well, you're not close enough. So for me, street photography is in your face. It's up there, it's in there, and you've got to blend in so you don't scare people. So it can be a bit daunting. Now, if you're an introverted sort of person, maybe street photography isn't for you. If you're slightly extroverted, give it a go, because you'll be amazed at what things you'll see and the stories that you can be told by these people. Because when I ask people, if I see somebody walking towards me and they've got bright coloured hair or a bald head with the Union Jack tattooed on their skull, I mean, I stop these people. I say, man, I love that tattoo. I'm Glenn, I'm doing a street photography project. Would you mind if I take your portrait? And 9 times out of 10, they say yes. My success rate is about 80 to 85% with people saying yes. And while I'm taking their street portrait, I'm asking them, so how long have you lived in the area? What's your background? What do you do for a job? And within 10 minutes, it's amazing what people can tell you in 10 minutes. They can tell you their whole life story in 10 minutes. And I've been told some horrific stories of people living rough on the streets, or people that are just living in a different type of lifestyle to you and I. So street photography is not only about taking images, it's about getting to know the people within that environment. And I really love doing it, and I don't mind, so I'll speak to anybody. And I'm not afraid of rejection. If you're afraid of a person that you don't like rejection, then maybe once again street photography isn't for you. So it's a matter of getting out there and just putting yourself out into the street. Read the street. For me, I tend to, you'll find in capital cities that people will walk one direction on one side of the street and another direction this way on this side of the street. I tend to walk towards the people. I don't like photographing backs of people. I like to capture their expression, especially when they don't know they're being photographed. Because as soon as you put a camera in someone's face, their persona changes. They tighten up, they freeze, and you're not getting that natural look from that particular person or that subject. So the element of surprise is fantastic. And probably one of the best photographers I've ever seen do that was Bruce Gilden in New York, where he would use a flash, and off-camera flash, and he would go up to them and he would walk straight up to them and go bang, and the shock on their faces, that was the impact of the photograph. You can see Bruce Gilden's work on YouTube, and as well as all the other great street photographers. So I suggest you check out those documentaries, because that's what they are. Now moving forward, I had the Olympus camera. It worked very well for a time. Then I upgraded to an Olympus OM1N, which was a fantastic camera for street photography. Once again, nice and small, and all the dials are on top. But moving forward to today, for the last 4 years, I've been shooting with this. It's the Canon EOS M3. It's a little mirrorless camera, right? Only mirrorless camera that I've ever owned, and probably will only ever own, as I'm a digital SLR shooter and will be for the rest of my life. It has an EVF viewfinder, which when you buy this camera you have to buy separately. Good on your Canon. So a great camera for street photography. I have this little wrist strap. And the reason why I like small cameras is because I don't stand out with it. You know, people don't even know I've got this camera. Now, there's ways that you can shoot street photography. You can shoot from the hip, where you have the camera down low, pre-focus, bang, or you can have it up to your eye and be out there and show people what you're doing, and that's what I like to do. I don't like to sneak around when I'm taking or doing street photography. Now, people say to me, what settings do you use? Well, basically with street photography, it's not about perfection. Perfection in street photography does exist, but it doesn't exist with what type of camera you use or the settings you use. It's all to do with capturing the moment. Now, last week I posted a video on some of the images that I've taken here with street photography, and there was one there with the decisive moment, which I was lucky enough to win an award for, and that was just something that happened in the blink of an eye. So this is why you need to have your settings correct in camera. Because there's one thing you don't want to be doing. When you see an interesting subject walking towards you, or you see something happening in the street, because things are happening very quickly in the street and you're moving, you don't want to be playing around with settings and looking at the back of the camera and take an image and then going like this, take an image, going like that. That's called chimping. You don't want to be doing that. You don't want to be chimping. So what my settings are for street photography is my aperture is at f8. Now f8 gives me a certain depth of field that I'm happy with. So it's at f8, I set my camera to f8. The shutter speed is 1/250th of a second because I need to freeze things. You need to freeze things basically in street photography. Sure, there's some instances where you want to create blur, which is fine. So you just, you reduce your shutter speed. But my go-to settings are 1/250th of a second shutter speed. f8 is my aperture. Now ISO, I set to auto, because these modern day cameras can handle noise and grain very well. And most of my street photography is in black and white anyway. They end up in black and white images. So a bit of grain suits the black and white image. So it's auto ISO. Then naturally the camera is set to manual to do this. Then there's focusing. Now some photographers I know that shoot the streets either shoot in autofocus or manual focus. For me, I manual focus. Now, the autofocus in modern day cameras is outstanding. You can't beat that, but it can get it wrong, because if you see something very quickly and that camera is trying to focus on that particular subject, you could miss it. So you've got to make every post a winner, and this is why I focus manually. Now, I use a thing called zone focusing. It's very similar to hyperfocal distance focusing that we use in landscape photography, but there is a difference. And the difference with zone focusing is this. I focus on something about 3 meters in front of me. And at f8, that gives me enough depth of field, because at 3 meters and beyond, for about another 3 meters, it will be in focus. So anything that comes in, or any person or any subject comes into my range from about 6, maybe 8 meters out in front of me, will be in focus to about 1/2 meter in front. So from 1/2 meter in front of me to about 8 meters further back, everything will be in focus. That is zone focusing. You're picking a zone and you're waiting for someone to walk into that zone. It is slightly different to hyperfocal distancing. Shares the same sort of qualities, but it's a different focusing point, where basically hyperfocal is you're trying to get as much in as possible, where with street photography it's close combat. So anything within say 6 to 8 meters in front of me will be in focus. So I use zone focusing. Now with street photography, there's many ways you can do it. Or many types of street photography. Some people go out and just shoot coloured doors in the old semi-homes that have been fully renovated. Or there's people that living rough, which is a real tough thing to photograph, because some of these people, it's very sad. For me, I don't specifically go out and photograph homeless people, but if the ones that I do photograph, I usually talk to, and they don't mind me taking their photograph because someone's showing interest in them. And that's all they want. They just want somebody to have someone listen. They want somebody to listen to them and to talk to them. and that's where I get the portrait images from. Then there's the image where you'll see two people having a conversation at a park bench, and it's the expressions that interest me. So street photography covers a lot of different subjects. Dogs are very good. There's always people walking dogs in streets around cafes. That's very good also. So if you want to try street photography, I suggest you give it a go. The first time you try, it's a bit daunting, and that's just natural because, you know, we don't want confrontation. But over the years of doing this, I can count on one hand how many confrontational instances I've had. And if somebody says to you, have you just taken my photo? I said, yeah, I did. I have taken your photo. Do you want to have a look? And I show them in the back of the camera. And they think, well, that's okay. And I say, can I give you that photograph? Have you got an email address or somewhere I can send you that image? And 9 times out of 10, they say yes. So at the beginning, they were a bit aggressive, but when you approach people with a smile, it's hard to knock that back. So use your natural human instinct to perform street photography. It's not all that daunting. So after a while, you gain that experience and you gain the nerve to go out and photograph strangers, because that's what street photography is all about. A classic example is Humans of New York. That is just a superb series, Humans of New York, where a young fellow, Brandon, I can't remember his surname, but his first name's Brandon, he went out and photographed people on the streets of New York, and he would sit down and speak to them. And they would tell him their story, their life story, and he would take photos of them. And it's an international renowned series, The Humans of New York, so take a look at that and you might learn a bit more. But that's me and my street photography. Very simple, one camera, one lens, settings are very simple, 1/250th of a second, ISO auto, f8. If I need to increase the exposure, on top of the Canon here, there's an exposure control button where I can go plus or minus. So if I want to brighten up the scene, I just go probably 1 stop, half a stop, probably 1.5 stops over, and that will give me enough light without having to adjust any other settings on this little mirrorless camera. But it's very small, very light, and it doesn't stand out. And that's the secret to street photography. You don't want to stand out, you want to blend in. So that's it. That's my street photography settings and what I do and how I started. So if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button and the bell next door so I don't miss anything. To the people that have subscribed to my channel, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's very much appreciated. So as I always say, be nice to yourself, family and friends, but most of all, you keep shooting, and bye for now.